right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are live. What camera am I looking into? I'm joined by my good buddy, Mitch Guidry today. Thanks for joining me today, brother. I want to talk about the real estate market. I was at a real estate meeting this morning. As mortgage professionals, all we do all day, every day is talk to consumers. We talk to real estate agents. So in today's show, if you joined to learn about real estate or mortgage, or if you're watching this in the replay, we're going to talk from a boots on the ground perspective. What's going on in the real estate market? What are agents seeing and feeling? What are consumers seeing and feeling? And I'm going to bounce some stuff off you, Mitch, because as much as we're in close proximity, being in the same office, we don't get a chance to chat the real estate market every single day. Cool. So I'd love to let's just start with your background, because I think that's interesting.
Sure.
From a real estate perspective, tell us what Mitch Guidry has been up to the last 2 or 3 decades.
Well, so I started in real estate as a residential agent, and then 4 years later as a broker. But I started back in 1989, 90. So go a long ways back. Did that for 20 some odd years. Owned my own company as a broker. Did thousands of transactions with mostly listing side, but a lot of buyer side also. And then after the crash, I had a very unique niche, but that niche kind of went away. So I was the buggy whip salesman after the invention of the automobile. So took a hiatus, went out into the solar industry, and worked in solar for a few years, but really missed the real estate industry, and knew that if I ever came back, I wanted to get on the money side this time. So a few years ago, that opportunity presented itself, came back on the mortgage side, and been loving it ever since.
Awesome, man. So as we sit June 2024, these last few years, there's tons of words to describe the real estate market. Weird, volatile. Some might say unaffordable. What are you seeing and hearing from clients right now in the market that are out there? They're pre-approved and they're shopping.
Mm-hmm.
What are they seeing? What are they saying to you?
Well, a couple of things that don't change is, certain people, certain segment of the market, they need to buy a home.
Right.
Whether kids are growing up and they're outgrowing their houses, whatever it is, they need to buy a home. So regardless of what the conditions are, the need is still there. The demand is still there. We're just trying to find a way to do it affordably for them and help them navigate the market to find a way to get in the door, so to speak. And then the other thing that I think has changed over the last few months is, when we went from the super low rates at 3% and in that range back up to 5 to 6 to 7, and then got as high as 8%, people were losing their minds. Of course, so were we. And, it made it very, very difficult because everybody was comparing today to 3%. And, compared to 3%, nothing looks really good.
Right.
But I think we've kind of turned the corner, and I saw it starting when we started to hit 8% levels and then started coming off of that. People started to shift their focus a little bit, or their perspective a little bit, if you will, and started thinking, okay, well, maybe this is the new reality. Maybe this is the new normal. We've been sitting around waiting for a couple of years now for rates to go back down. I don't think we'll ever see 3% again, at least not in my lifetime, maybe yours, but not mine. But I think people kind of come to reality, and, you've heard me use this phrase recently. It's, the price of bread is the price of bread. And if you're hungry, you just need to go out and buy some bread.
Right.
And it's unfortunate. It's tough to swallow, not to, excuse the pun. But it is what it is. And so, like I said, the goal for us, for you and I every day, for our clients and for our realtor partners, is to help make that as affordable as possible, as pain-free as possible, so that people can get in the door. Because the long-term benefits of home ownership, the wealth building aspects, the appreciation, all of the other favorable things that are associated with owning your own home, as opposed to paying, I want to pay my mortgage, or I want to pay my landlord's mortgage.
Right.
All of that is still there, and it's still very much worthwhile. So how do we help people get into the market?
Right. Yeah, I totally feel that. And as somebody, I'm talking to clients every single day, I feel the stress, the strain, the fact that, like, hey, this is more expensive. not only on the purchase side, but the money I'm borrowing to buy it is more expensive as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
I thought about this and I had a conversation earlier today about it. I don't agree with Dave Ramsey on a lot of things, but paraphrasing, he said something to the effect of like, hey, home ownership has always been hard. It's always been something that you have to work towards and that you stretch a little bit when you do it. And so I thought back to my own personal experience.
Yeah.
In 2006, I was 26 years old. A $2,600 payment was the moon to me and my, fiance at the time, now wife, Katrina. We had one of her friends renting a room. We had one of my friends renting a room.
Right.
And over time, income goes up, the ability to refinance and lower the mortgage payment. Like we had to work into that being a comfortable thing where people were probably spoiled during COVID. They just got to walk right into comfortability where, you want to buy a $500,000 house and put 5% down. Here's a 2.625 and a payment that's less than you're currently renting.
Right.
Like that's not historically normal. I'd love to hear from you, someone who's been around real estate for 30 years. Like for somebody who's looking at it today, and I don't like to be sunshine and rainbows and everything's perfect. Homeownership is the dream and renting is for idiots. Like I'm of the mindset that it's not for everybody and there's different time and place. For somebody who looks at it and just is staring down a $2,500 a month rental or a $3,300 a month mortgage, like what do you say to that person to help them kind of get over that mental thing of like, hey, it's an extra $10,000 a year to be a homeowner?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. So a little bit of perspective, you were freaking out about a $2,600 payment. I'll tell you what, when I bought my first home in 1988, I was freaking them out about how do I make that $614 payment?
That's in Louisiana?
No, that's here
in
California. I mean, I came from Louisiana and, I bought a home for, I think it was $110,000. And I'm like, you guys pay over $100,000 for a house? Oh my God. So, perspective is everything. Again, going back to my theme. No. Okay. So yeah, 3,300 in payment versus 2,500 in rent.
Yeah. There might be a scenario like that out there.
There's a few things, and these are on the logical side. And what we got to understand is that there's still a lot of fear that goes around that because home ownership, buying your first home is one of the biggest transactions you'll ever make in your life. And other than getting married or getting divorced, it's probably one of the most stressful things you'll ever encounter, or so the studies say. But if we think about it logically, $2,500 a month is still a lot of money. You got to work hard for that. But guess what? $2,500 doesn't stay $2,500. 25 gets to 26, goes to 27.50, goes to 29, goes to 32, because your landlord's up in that rent every year if you get to stay in that house and he doesn't sell it out from underneath you.
Right.
When you buy a home today, I mean, 99% of the market, I don't know if that's accurate, but certainly in what we do, they're all fixed rates. So that means your payment is fixed. So that 33 stays 33.
Right.
If market gets better, we refinance it. It comes down to 31, comes down to 29 maybe, but it's not going to go to 36 to 40. It stays at 33. And again, your $2,600 payment stayed $2,600. Your income rose.
Right.
All of the other pieces went up. That offsets it. So that gap closes pretty quickly. And pretty soon you find yourself where your payment
better
is
side of it
is less than what the people are renting that same house for. More importantly, and I was running some numbers for a client just an hour ago, but let's talk about appreciation. In California, average historical appreciation is 4 to 5% a year, right? So what we consider a entry-level home now at $400,000 or $500,000, well, 4% on 500,000 is $20,000 a year in appreciation. I mean, where else can you wake up, breathe, and make $20,000 a year just because you own a home? If you're in a rental, your landlord's making 20 grand a year and you're spending $2,500 a month, $30,000 a year to rent his home and pay his mortgage or her mortgage.
Right.
You're getting none of those benefits. So again, I asked, do you want to pay your mortgage or do you want to pay your landlord's mortgage?
Right. Yeah. And I guess
you're buying a house either way.
Yeah. For some people, I think they want the best of both worlds. So it's like, I want to
Sure.
start out ahead.
Hey,
Where
who doesn't?
in today's market, I think that's, my takeaway from that is like, you might have to start out a little bit behind and you might have to look into the future and have a 10, 15, 20 year kind of horizon when you do the math to see the benefits. Cause
Right.
like you said, 4% appreciation, $20,000 a year in equity. You're also, $300, $400, $500 a month going towards principal. Little piggy bank that people don't realize is that part of your mortgage payment every month goes towards the debt pay down. So you go from owing $320 to $319,600 to $319,200 to $318,800. And over time, like that's the reason in my opinion, why there's that humongous discrepancy between what a homeowner's net worth is and a renter's, is because that's a forced savings. Like,
Absolutely.
Bless all of us, myself included. It's hard to be strict with yourself about saving money. It's hard to like have long-term game plan when it comes to saving money. Like that one's forced on you. It's really hard. Like real estate, while you can buy and sell it, it's pretty illiquid. And so you're stuck there and it's like, I'm making a payment, whether it's a rent payment or mortgage payment, like I'm doing it every single month. You're not thinking about the fact that like, hey, I'm actually paying down this. And then you look at it all combined where it's like debt pay down, home price appreciation. You probably pay less on your taxes if you've got some tax benefit baked in. And all of a sudden, like you've got this three-pronged thing that's adding $30, $40, $50,000 a year to your net worth. And no wonder you wake up in 20 years and you're worth $1 million more.
And the beautiful part about that is that you don't have to do anything. It happens without you worrying about it. It happens without you taking any additional action. Again, I said it a little bit facetiously, but it's true. I wake up in the morning, I breathe, I make money.
Right.
So as long as I'm still breathing, I'm still doing okay.
Yeah.
The rate at which that happens obviously fluctuates up and down. Again, 4 to 5% is the long-term average in California, but
we've been on a pretty good run.
We've been on a pretty good tear.
I just saw the last 39 years in California were like 6.7%. So
okay, so the math is even better.
I'm gonna make a sharp left turn, and I'm gonna go from all sunshine and rainbows to talking about, which I think was a theme this morning. I see Ryan Lundquist in the comments. Thanks for joining, Ryan. He talked about what did he talk about? He talked about the changing temperature. And he's always got the best analogies. I apologize, Ryan. I'm gonna mess up your analogy, but the temperature
seems quite good. I read your stuff, Ryan. Nice job.
The temperature seems to be changing in real estate. And so I think where some people get it wrong is they're like, oh my gosh, there's more inventory, there's more price reductions, the wheels are falling off, everything's going to be on sale. If I wait 6 months, we're going to pay 30% less. A couple things that I want people to realize if you're listening to this. One, every single year, home prices inch up the first half of the year, and then they trickle down the second half of the year. I honestly, Mitch, didn't know that until a couple of years ago. And I looked at it and go, oh my gosh, like if you see your average market appreciate 6% a year, it might be that it goes up 10% between January and June. And then it goes down from July through December. And so over the course of a year, it's up 6%. Like, I might be a dummy, but I didn't know that until a few years ago.
You mean there's a cycle to this?
There's actually there's some rhyme and some reason to what's going on there. But I want to look at it. I've got this cool thing. Shout out to Altos Research. Altos Research does a great job. I'm a paid subscriber, so I get access to all their cool reports. I got to have Mike Simonson on here sometime. But this market action index and all this data I'm looking at is going to tell us a little bit about the Sacramento market. I want to take this and then just throw some ideas off each other, like what's going on in the market. 62 is what Altos is saying is the market action index. And if you're looking at this, Mitch, like 30 is the line where it's like not a buyer's market or a seller's market. So the higher the number, the more of a seller's market is. For anybody listening, it's like, what does a seller's market mean? Seller's market means they have more leverage. There's less houses on the market. Even with high interest rates, there's demand out there. And so there's more buyers than there are sellers. Sellers get to call the shots. Now, people should realize too, they don't get to call all the shots and they don't get to call it on every house, right? If you've got a dump on a bad street in a bad neighborhood and you list it at any price thinking it's going to sell, you're out your mind. But a well-priced home in a good neighborhood that, shows well, like those things sell super quick. And that's something that's later in this report where it actually breaks it out into segments. And we'll look at that later, where the stuff on the lower end just flies off the shelf. But when you see this 62, this seller's market, what do you think, Mitch, and what has been your experience working with buyers? I know you've got, buyers that are pre-approved. They're out there looking. What are they encountering in today's market?
Well, it looks like it's inched a little bit lower in the last month. So it's come down from 64 to 62. So just a slight change in the buyer's favor, but still very much in the seller's category. What we've seen, I think, on the street is that we've gone from a place where, a couple of years ago, every home that came on the market was getting 5, 10, in some cases, 20, 30 offers, to now most of the listings are getting 2 to 3 to 4 offers. So there's still a lot of competition out there. You still got to be sharp. You still got to make a good offer. You've got to have your financing ready to go if you're financing. But there's not as much competition. So that's working a little bit more in the buyer's favor. But the sellers still are, for the most part, calling most of the shots. They just don't get to put a piece of junk on the market and name their price anymore.
Right.
Those days are gone. I think the days of, non-contingent offers where you're waiving all the inspections, which I think was crazy anyway. It's just really dangerous thing to do as a former agent. I mean, I can tell you stories about how stuff like that blows up. But the bottom line is that it's better for buyers, but it's still, the leverage is still on the seller side for the most part, but it is easier. It is more competitive. We're doing a lot more with seller concessions now. And again, those homes that are in a good neighborhood, in great condition, showing well, those are the ones that are moving really quickly still. And of course, the stuff at the bottom end of the market, because there's so much competition at the entry level.
Right.
But I think you're seeing overall a lot more willingness on the part of sellers to be reasonable, which is a godsend, I think.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, offering concessions to do things like buy downs or help cover closing costs and things of that nature. So there is some flexibility out there, and with a good realtor, you can negotiate a good, strong deal that's favorable for both sides.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I see it happen every single day. Great agent on the buy side, buyer who's realistic and is listening to the professional that they hired.
Yep.
Does their agent reach out to the list side and say, we're not going to pay your 600 list price. We can get close, but why don't we do 595 with some credit? Because my buyer wants to do a 1.0 buy down or whatever the case may be. And so more deals are coming together. And I think it's because the sell side is coming back down to earth.
Yeah.
And it only takes a few weeks of being on the market to where they really, really start to listen to their agent when their agent's like, I told you shouldn't list it at 649. Told you to list this thing at 619. And here we are 3 weeks later, still in the market.
And I don't know about you, but I've seen more and heard more where, property goes into contract really quickly, but then it's fallen out. And for one reason or another, the deal didn't go through. And I think that's where you see sellers really starting to open up and get realistic. Is like they thought they had that easy score, and then it gets taken away from them. Then they get more realistic and kind of come down there.
Right. Yeah. I got to tell you a story too. And I think I'm going to have my buddy Doug Reynolds on. I'm not going to name any names or any properties, so I'm sure he doesn't mind me sharing this story, but he shared a story recently, and it was interesting because a house was on the market, got into contract, and fell out. And during the real estate meeting I was at this morning, we were talking about more stuff falling out, and whether it's buyers being more picky, some of them not really understanding what they're getting into and not being educated from the lender's perspective, which drives me crazy. But he had a buyer where a house that they really liked came back on the market. And so calls his buyer, hey, look, 123 Main Street's back on, goes to call the listing agent to talk through what's it going to take. My buyer really likes it. And he's thinking, this thing was on the market for 22 days, then went into contract, and now it came off literally hours ago. That seller was so spooked by it falling out of contract that the minute it came back on and they got an offer in the vicinity, they accepted it like that.
Wow.
And so, realtor buddy was like, that's not normal, but it highlights that point that you kind of talked about, where you sit on the market or you have a deal fall out, all of a sudden a seller is like, in this position where a little bit freaked out.
Yeah.
And I've talked to buyers too, because as lenders, we're team buy side all
Right.
day, every day, just working with buyers.
Exactly.
And so I don't wish bad on any sellers, but I like when buyers have more leverage.
Mhm.
And as this number comes down and the market action index comes back, and we start heading into a place where, like, literally on this report, we've got inventory ticking up. And like, if I click on this report on my desktop, it says 1385 right now for
Mhm.
inventory. Like, it shows me the week on week click up in inventory. The average days on market, it came down during the busy spring buying season. Like, I think that continues to go up, and like historically it just does, right? As you get later and later in the year. And so we're going to be in a market, in my opinion, and my opinion kind of is backed by historical data, over the next few months, where buyers are going to have more and more say. They're going to have a little bit of leverage to say, you know what, I really need 10,000 in seller credit to pay the closing costs, or I'm going to use it for a temporary buy down. What kind of strategies are you using with buyers specifically? Me and you do a lot in Sacramento, to go out there and structure something that, like you said, something that's fair for both sides. But buyers in today's market, they're pickier than ever, and they're a little bit, scared is probably the right word.
It's really driven by the individual buyer's needs and, of course, their financial profile. Where you've got, say, a first-time home buyer who good income, good credit, they qualify well, they just don't have a lot of money in the bank, because let's face it, even 3 or 3.5% on $500,000 home is a lot more than on a couple $100,000. So, saving up that kind of money in an environment over the last few years between COVID and then the inflation that we've seen post-COVID. I have a client that was ready to buy, was qualified, everything was great. And then his wife got hit, in a car accident. She was okay, thank goodness, but totaled their car. So now they've got to go out and buy a new car. Now, all of a sudden, the old one was free and clear. Now they've got a $400 a month car payment. Totally changes their financial picture in terms of being able to qualify, not to mention the down payment. So it wiped out a lot of their savings. So now it's focused on finding down payment assistance help, or finding seller credits where they're willing to cover some of the closing costs, so you can use that money for the down payment, one or the other. And then there are those others who are very well qualified, maybe self-employed buyers. All of their needs are going to be different. I don't think I've really directly answered your question, but it really is client dependent on what kind of strategy.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I think it's just what I see more often than not is going into a consult. You probably don't know. The client, in many cases, doesn't know either.
Mhm.
The best way to find it is to talk through it.
That's right.
And I've got real estate agent partners and financial advisors and accountants that send me business, and they want to talk about a bunch of stuff before I even talk to the client. And I have to tell them, I don't know, right? Like, this client might tell me I'm only going to be there for 3 to 5 years, or this client might tell me this is something that, is going to be an investment property now, but it's going to turn into my primary, when I move to Sacramento. There's a million different variables. And I look at my calendar and I've got a 12:30 with this person. I'm not going to make assumptions. I think that that's something that I've learned over the last 10 years in mortgages. Like, I shouldn't make assumptions. I used to, this is something too, that like, I want to get off my chest and just admit to it. I used to spend an hour, Mitch, Excel spreadsheets and preparation and study this program. And I did all this stuff in preparation for a meeting with a client. And then the first 2 minutes,
Guilty.
They go, by the way, this, that, and that. And all of a sudden it's like, I just did an hour work for nothing, because none of this stuff applies.
Right. Absolutely. And, a lot of times the same thing with the partner that refers them. They'll tell you, as you said, they'll want to kind of give you the background. And I like to hear that, because I want to have an idea of who I might be dealing with. But oftentimes the things that they focus on, because of what they, this is usually a client of theirs. So depending on their profession and what they advise that person on, their focus is in one place where ours may be in a totally different spot. And as you said, even the buyer comes in and they'll start telling us a lot of information that may or may not be really relevant to structuring the home. But, there's a lot of names for people in our profession, right? Loan officers, loan consultant, loan this, mortgage advisor. But I like the term advisor because really that's what we do. And our first job in that is to listen to the client and then to ask questions, right? And to help them understand, and certainly help us understand what their primary focus on, what their focus is, what their dreams, what they want to accomplish today, 5 years, 10 years from now, so we can set things up in motion. I always describe the process as kind of like a roadmap. I want to buy a house. I want to do X, Y, or Z. Well, that means I want to get to a certain destination. But before I can help you get to your destination, I have to know where we're starting from. Right. So that's all those basic questions that we start with. And then we put together the roadmap and, what kind of vehicle do we need to be in? How long is the route going to take? What twists and turns might we encounter? And then go from there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's something for consumers to take away as well, is like start asking yourself these questions.
Yes, absolutely.
As you were talking about where we're starting, I thought to myself, something I've implemented recently, and it's been gold, is I'll just ask the client, where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? And that is such a great question, especially if they haven't thought about it.
Right.
Because we're talking about a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, and should we pay points and should we buy it down and this, and the client goes, well, 5 years from now, this is going to be free and clear. I'm going to sell the house that I left in Fairfield. Got some investments that are maturing, whatever the case may be. That changes everything about how we structure today's mortgage.
Sure.
Because there's no way we're going to spend $7,500 to buy a rate down on a mortgage that you're going to start lumping extra payments at and throw proceeds from a sale and pay off completely. Right. And so, I like that. Like,
or refinance within the next couple of years.
Right. That's a big one lately too. And I feel like I'd be beating a dead drum if I talked about, buy it today and then refinance it tomorrow. Where I want to go next, since as we sit here, whatever today is, June 11th, there's a bunch of guys in suits sitting around meeting the Fed's meeting today and tomorrow. And then tomorrow they're going to come out. I don't have it to pull up, but there's a 97 or 98% chance that there's no rate cut from the Fed. And so we don't expect a lot of movement, but I know people love this, like saying where are mortgage interest rates headed, talking about mortgage rates. As a mortgage guy, I can't avoid it. It's what everyone wants to know from me.
I have the answer, by the way.
Okay. I knew with all your knowledge that you were going to tell us exactly where the 30-year fixed will be at the end of 2024, where it's going to be at the end of 2025. But where do you see things as a fellow guesser of what it's in store for mortgage interest rates?
Well, again, I said I have the right answer, and I have the right answer. Okay. Are mortgage rates going to go up or down? The answer is yes. Okay.
Nailed it.
Okay. So sorry for the corny joke. All right. What do I think rates are going to do? Well, I think we all learned over the last 7 to 12 months that as optimistic as we were that the market was going to shift in the buyer's favor and rates were going to come down, we expected to be at 5% by now.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we were way wrong.
Just a bit outside.
Yeah, just a little bit. I still do expect that we'll see some slow reduction in rates, and I think the data backs that up, although the jobs market keeps running counter to that, which is one of the main reasons that it's still up. But not to get too deep into the weeds, the data supports that over the next 12 to 18, and certainly over the next 24 months, we should see a moderate decline in rates, which will be great for buyers because it'll make purchasing a home, it'll make financing a home more affordable. But then, of course, it's also going to mean more buyers coming back into the market, which is going to drive up demand further and push competition even higher. There's a lot of people sitting on the sidelines waiting for rates to come down so they can re-enter. So it's not like it's going to go down in a vacuum. But short answer is probably some moderate decline. Again, I don't think we'll ever see 3%, if we get to 5% in the next 2 to 3 years, that would be amazing. I don't think we'll see that.
Right.
What do you see?
Yeah. Well,
you're deeper in the data than I am.
You know what's funny is I'm on record saying this. And so like you can look on my channel or on One Rental at a Time. I'm on, film saying this, and I can go back for the receipts that I told people, be careful what you wish for. You don't want rates to go down too much, too fast. Yeah. It will be detrimental to you as a buyer. And to your earlier point, I agree 1,000% because I look at the, applications I have every single day. People need to move. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with the real estate market. It has nothing to do with mortgage interest rates. And so they're going to move. And so I'm looking out for what's in their best interest, which is a relatively stable housing market, which when rates are higher and we have the amount of inventory we have right now, it's pretty stable. Mm-hmm. You can go out there and look at a house. It's not going to fly off the shelf and sell within 4 days. You're not going to compete against 15 buyers. That's a good experience for the buyer. Yeah. The faster and farther mortgage rates go down, the more demand you bring back. If, there's not some magical, influx of supply, it's going to be a problem. So I'm on record saying I wanted rates to go down slower. And I said, if they went down, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I just remember being super conservative and saying, if we went from, 7.5 to 7 over the course of 2024. And then if we went from 7 to 6 over the course of 2025, in my head, that was slow compared to all these, analysts that were talking about like 6, rate cuts in 2024. Yeah. The funny part now is I'm looking at it and I go, it might go down even slower than that, right? Based on the jobs data and all the other stuff that's happened. And I think that it probably was a little bit of just kind of hopeless optimism that people were like, you know what, at a 5.5% rate, this mortgage will look a lot sweeter. I just want rates to be 5.5% without thinking about what the unintended consequences of that would be. And so I think it was Fannie or Freddie or Mortgage Banker Association, whichever it was, their predictions for 2025 were like 0.1% decrease per quarter. And so I think it was like 6.9 in Q1, 6.8 in Q2, 6.7 in Q3, 6.6 Q4 of 2025. And so if we went over that trajectory, I think that with mortgage rates being at that higher level for a sustained period of time, we're seeing inventory come to the market because just natural, like people have to buy and sell. And this frozen market that we've kind of lived in where people weren't selling because they were locked into low interest rates and whatnot, like it's slowly unwinding.
And I think that's where a nice, stable, slow decline, like you said, will be helpful because it keeps the market stable. But the longer we go at this level, the more that piece that you're talking about, that frozen market where, I'm in that place myself. I'd love to have a different home than I have. I've been in my house for 25 years, but at the same time, I'm at 3%. So why do I want to sell that at 3% and go buy even, at the same price at 7.5%? I don't
math.
The math don't work. So I don't want to do that. But there are those, again, for whatever circumstances they need to move, they'll be less resistant as those come down. Obviously the gap closes, so it's a little bit easier for them to swallow that move. But more importantly, the longer we're at this, again, it becomes the norm. We're back to reality. And, again, the price of bread is the price of bread. If you're hungry, you got to eat. Right. You don't like it, but it is what it is. So I think we'll see a slow thawing of that. And as those people start to move, then what happens is the inventory comes up, it frees up that piece, more supply equals out with the demand a little bit, eases pressure on prices. So it's good for us all.
Yeah. I like your analogy. The price of bread is the price of bread. What comes to mind too is I like to be straightforward when I have conversations with people. People come to me, I'm sure they come to you at the real estate market and they're waiting for some big event, some 30% reduction in prices. Election. And Right. In elections, do prices go down by 30%? Do rates fall off a cliff? They kind of, are desperate for something different than what we have. But, gas is $5 a gallon in California. The price of bread is the price of bread. As much as we want it to be different,
Yeah.
It's just, it's not in the cards to be different. And so I know this got brought up earlier today. Somebody mentioning, like, what if home prices fall off a cliff? What if home prices go down by 20 or 30%? Like, what do you think the chances of something like that happening, based on a guy who's been in the real estate market for decades?
Yeah. Well, show me the data that points to that, any evidence that that's even possible at this point. I mean, short of a national disaster or, larger, I don't think there's anything evidencing that or anything even pointing in that direction. A lot of people think back, and because this is more recent experience, they think back to the crash of '08 and say, well, it happened.
It happened.
But if you think back historically, it's happened, unless I'm wrong, exactly once in the recorded history of home prices in the United States. And that was '08. And there were a lot of factors that came together to make that perfect storm. Unemployment was high, home equity was record lows, prices were declining. So that means you couldn't get out of the house if you wanted to. You couldn't sell without taking a huge loss or doing a short sale or something like that. Today, what happens? Somebody loses a job, God forbid, something tragic happens. They have to move. They're forced to sell. Well, they walk away with 200K in the bank.
Right.
There are worse things in life. But there's so much equity. We're at record levels of equity on home ownership. And so if you have to walk away, you can walk away and get away relatively unscathed.
Right.
It may hurt a little bit. It might take a little bit of a haircut, but you can get out and you'll survive. That stuff wasn't present in 2008. Not to mention the whole rest. The job market was terrible. So many things.
The loans we were writing were not even anywhere close. Neg, AM, and pick a payment and all that.
I can tell you some stories. I was on the real estate side at that point when that happened. And some of the offers that we saw coming in, we saw people coming in with offers that were, $100,000 over list price, which would never appraise. And the guy was saying, "Oh, don't worry, I've got an appraiser that'll bring it in." And of course, that was a big part of the problem with the market at the time,
right?
Is that there was a lot of that kind of shenanigans going on,
that
really undercut the whole market.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that got cleaned up. As we know, we're extremely highly regulated now. It's, much to our chagrin sometimes, because it makes our job more difficult.
Yeah. That's the thing too. I think people need to realize 2008 and all of the problems that the real estate market had and all of the things that were wrong with it, like none of that stuff exists today. Literally none of it. Loans, way, way less risky. Like we've gone to the opposite end of the spectrum where it was like, a pulse and a warm body and you'd have a loan.
Yeah.
Versus today, people are like, man, getting a loan is hard. Well, it's for a reason, right? And they regulate it and they made sure that you're well qualified.
The market learned its lessons.
Right.
And the regulators learned the lessons. And, we can argue that there may be some over-regulation, and that's probably true in some cases, but it started to ease off a little bit. But it should be tough to get a home loan.
Right.
And it should be tough to get any kind of loan. I mean, the bottom line is, can you pay it back, and are you going to pay it back?
And that's the thing too, is like one of the lessons you said, the banks, or we've learned our lessons, is that like, we're not trying to enter, a state where people are foreclosing at mass. So, I read something recently. One thing that wasn't in place back then was all this forbearance and all the things that are being done today where, even if we have people that, fall into a situation where they can't pay, which is going to happen. It's going to happen in any market. The banks are doing everything in their power, forbearance, work out something with you. Like foreclosure is not good for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
The bank doesn't want it. The consumer certainly doesn't want it. And so, there's that just layered on to all these other reasons why there's not going to be a flood of inventory from foreclosures. So, where is this 20 or 30% decline coming from? I hate to break it to everybody, but it's not coming. Right. So, if you like that stuff and you're just into that type of content, then you just got to go watch Reventure Capital. That guy's got plenty of data, but man, it's been a long time waiting for his crash. I don't know what his next venture is going to be, where he's going to make money and ad revenue after he's gone 7 straight years with calling a market crash that hasn't happened.
Well, so you keep making the same prediction often enough and long enough, eventually something will happen, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That meteor will eventually hit the earth.
When you mentioned having stories too about back in the day, you've probably got plenty. I'm not incriminating anybody because I honestly don't remember who it was. But I was in a separate line of work. I was, managing a small business, but a lot of our clients were real estate and mortgage. And I knew plenty of people that were mortgage brokers. I even visited some AmeriQuest shops and saw how they forged signatures and did all that stuff. Thankfully, I didn't get into mortgage back in the day. So I've never, had to write any loans that I didn't feel good about. And that kept me up at night. Wrote only good loans. But I remember a story specifically from a client of ours that was joking while they're sitting there playing cards, managing the card room, that check this out, in that case of yours where he said, don't worry, it'll appraise. This appraiser, to make it appraise for the value they wanted, kind of copy and pasted from 2 or 3 different properties, different attributes. And look at the remodeled backyard and the swimming pool. Like, I guess was there not Google Maps back then? Like they literally had an appraisal on a house that didn't have a pool, Mitch. It didn't have a pool. And there was a backyard with a swimming pool. I don't know what else they put in there, some kitchen photos of a lovely kitchen remodel, but what a friggin' time, man. I could imagine, you doing a ton of real estate sales back in those days. What was that like from, I guess 3, 4, 5, and 6 was kind of the run up.
Mm-hmm.
And then it all unwinded. What was that like during the run up when things were just going crazy?
Those were good years.
Yeah. a lot of homes are being transacted.
Yeah. Just when I put in my pool.
Right.
Life was good. And, but it's, we had pretty much a good balanced market at that point. Typical home took 40 to 50 days to sell. And then of course to close after that. But it was balanced in terms of buyers versus sellers market. You had sellers that were willing to make concessions. You had buyers that were willing to pay reasonable prices. There was a lot of negotiating that went along. So the market operated like a good market should, because things were in balance for the most part. That's something that we haven't really seen over the last few years, and particularly since COVID, is that things were way out of balance. Things were skewed one way or another, mostly in the seller's favor, of course. And part of that because money was so cheap. And then all of a sudden money wasn't cheap anymore, and it's not.
Right.
And you had the run up in home prices, and now you've got an equal run up in the cost of the money that it takes to buy that house. It makes it 4 times as expensive. So, but no, the market was balanced and things were reasonable at that point. You didn't have you weren't playing a lot of games with things. But when regulations started coming out that saying you have to lend certain number of people, and we're not getting enough loans into certain segments of the economy, so we're going to open up the gates and kind of push aside common sense regulation to bring more money into those areas. All of a sudden that opened the gates. It was okay. And in some cases, lenders were actually forced, highly encouraged by the authorities to make loans that were more risky really than they should have been. And then the government started backing those loans to do it.
Right.
And you ended up in this, that was the beginning of the slippery slope.
Right.
And that's what led, at least as far as I could tell, in my opinion, to a lot of the activities that ended up crashing the whole system.
Right. Which, I mean, in retrospect, you look back and you're like, you're loaning somebody 100%. You don't care if their credit score is 500. You don't care.
It was 110%.
Yeah. Like how they've managed credit in the past. Let's not worry too much about that. And what I think as a numbers nerd was one of the biggest problems was, if you put in front of somebody, you put 0% down, you can have this house of your dreams. The payment's $1,800. Next year, it might be $2,400, and the adjustable stuff where it could literally double in 3 years. People they're not financially sophisticated enough. Most people, and not a knock on people. They're just like, they're great at other things and maybe not finance, to realize if I'm paying $1,800 a month in rent and I can't, rub two nickels together, what makes me think that a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, if I've got a $3,600 house payment, that I'm going to be able to pay it, and that versus what we're seeing today. And like what we talked about, the regulations, like we got to see that this is X% of your income on a monthly basis. And we've got to, look at all your debts and your credit score and how you've handled the past. And like, you got to have some skin in the game, all of the things that exist today. Like it's night and day what it was back then.
And I think, the buyer's perspective today has changed from what it was in 06, 07, 08, when it was leading up to that. Because like you said, back then it was, if I can qualify, that means I can afford it.
Right.
And I should buy it because I want it.
Yeah.
I counsel buyers now, and usually I don't have to, because they'll tell me before I ever bring it up to them, is that, our job, part of our job as a loan advisor, when we're getting somebody qualified and pre-approved for financing, is to determine what's your cap, what's the max level you can get to.
And you as a buyer tell me. I'm not going to tell you what your max is.
Right. So, but no, I think there's two numbers.
Okay.
Right. So my job is to tell you the maximum that the bank says you can afford.
Right.
You have to tell me the max number that you think you can afford, that you're comfortable with. And we're going to take the lower of those two numbers.
Right.
Okay. But like I said, I think more buyers now come to me and they tell me that ahead of time. Well, yeah, I may be able to qualify for $5,500 a month, but I don't want to pay that much.
Right.
So they're kind of tempering their own expectations. Yeah, I can afford, got one in escrow right now. They could afford easily $580,000, $590,000. No, we want to buy at $450,000. They ended up at, I think, about $490,000 in a home that they love, that they're getting put together, and hopefully we'll close in a week or so. But again, the bottom line is that the expectations and the buyer is being reasonable with their own budget. They're focusing in on what they can truly afford, understanding that, yeah, this is not just for 6 months, or it's not just qualification doesn't mean I can continue to make these payments.
Right.
I have to live on a budget. This has to be within my means.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the beauty of the 30-year fixed rate.
Yeah.
Is that your payment's going to stay the same. Even if you expect raises, even if you expect, some of your expenses to go away, and that car gets paid off, and, the kid moves off and we don't have that expense anymore, whatever the case may be, you want to be realistic about what you can afford in the future. I want to poke in here and see if we got some questions.
Sure.
Christina Alfonso, hoping by the end of 2025, 6.5 or less, looking to refinance my mortgage I got last year at 7. Rest assured, Christina, if you reach out to me all day, every day, I love doing break-even analysis, because your 7 to 6.5 might make sense if you owe 800,000. If you call me and you've got a $111,000 loan balance, and someone tells you you're going to refinance for a 0.5% savings, I'm gonna tell you no. You're saving $550 a year with that 0.5%, and if there's 4,000 in cost baked in, it might take you 8 years to break even on that refinance. So whenever the time comes, greatmortgagebroker.com, Christina, we're happy to help. Every person I talk to says the same thing. Why am I going to buy something new when I have a 3% mortgage and my property taxes will be absurd at the home price right now? That's something we didn't touch on, but like property taxes too. You go from a $300,000 home to a $700,000 home. And some people might say, well, I've got 200 in equity, so I'm going to throw that at it. And rates are a little bit higher, but no big deal. It should be about the same payment.
Mm-hmm.
And then we show them the payment.
So, I'm gonna make a case, and just to remind the audience that in California, of course,
right,
this is national audience, but in California we have Prop 13, And so a couple of things on that, when we talk about fixed mortgage and the security that comes from knowing that that's going to be stable, Prop 13, and by the way, support Prop 13, don't let them overturn it.
Right.
Prop 13 is what keeps our taxes, our property taxes stable in California. You know,
Mhm.
your property tax is based on the price that you pay for the home. And so, yeah, buying a more expensive home means you're going to pay more taxes than the neighbor who bought it for $300,000 less than you did. But it can only go up no more than 2% per year, period, end of story. And so that keeps your tax payment stable also. Talk to folks in Texas
Oh yeah.
who get reassessed every other year. You know, I've got a sister there. She hires an attorney every time they reassess her property, and she goes in and appeals it. And it costs her money to do that, to bring her taxes down. Anyway, there's a lot of stability there. One other thing too is, remember, a lot of the folks, a lot of the sellers out there, and they don't think about this. They say, yeah, why do I want to trade in my 3% mortgage and I'm going to buy a house that's more expensive and my property tax is going to go up? For folks who don't have as much black hair as they used to, like me, you know, if you're over 55, you can actually move in California and take your old tax basis with you. So giving up that older home and moving to a newer home doesn't necessarily hit you on the property tax side.
Right.
So there's some advantages there, and that can free up a little bit. But yeah, it's still trading in a 3% for a 6%.
Right. Yeah.
Or
And
7.
and I literally had this conversation earlier today. I get it. You know, the lock-in effect is real. Low interest rate, lower property taxes because you bought it at 300, even though it's worth 550.
Yep.
And so what I've seen is that it's just how strong is the pull from whatever the reasons are you want to buy. Oh, I hate living in a condo. I'm tired of paying HOAs. I need a backyard. Okay.
I've got 4 kids now.
Is that stronger than, gosh, my mortgage payment is going up $800 a month, or $1,200 a month, you know, higher price, higher rate, higher tax bill. And for some people, this is going to be a strong enough push, and it's going to outweigh the math part of it. Right. Because ultimately over these last couple of years, that's something that I've learned, is that it's not all just math and numbers. If it was all math and numbers, then there would be very little, you know, going on in the real estate world. The reality is there's over 4 million resale homes, you know, transacted every single year. And so, you know, people are moving because they need to move. So who else we got here? AJ, this is another one. God, I love math questions. You can fire math questions at me all day long. Does it make sense to prepay a 6.5% mortgage if I have extra cash? I know what I'm going to say, but I want to start with you, Mitch, because you might have a different point of view, which is fine. I'd like different.
Again, it depends, right? How long are you going to stay in that house? If you're going to be there for a long time, yeah, maybe so. If you have a lot of other debts, this is where I agree with Dave Ramsey. If you got a lot of other debts, spend it taking those down. And, you know, your home typically is the one debt that you can hang on to. That's very reasonable to have. But if you've got credit card debt at 25, 30% interest, if you've got auto loans, things like that, just think about the little things that you can eliminate in your life. All those little debts that are $20 a month, $50 a month, $110 a month payments. Sometimes if you got, you know, an extra $5,000 laying around, if you put that on your mortgage, well, that might shorten your mortgage term from 30 years to 29 and a half years, or to 28 and a half years. But you're not going to realize that effect, that impact, for 25 years down the road. Whereas if you take that and you use it to pay down those other things, you'll immediately see that today.
Yeah.
And then that frees up more cash. And you can do that. Start putting an extra $100 on your mortgage every month. You know, we were running the math for some folks yesterday. And, you know, if you just make the equivalent of one extra payment a year, you know, take whatever your monthly payment is and make one extra payment a year, or divide it in 12 and make that much extra per month, it'll cut 7.5 years off your mortgage. But again, you won't realize that until the end of your mortgage. It doesn't lower your payment today.
Right.
It's good to do if you don't have anything else to do with that money, but it also depends, you know, if you have you said 6.5%.
Yeah.
Right?
6.5. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you've got money laying around that you'd have nothing else to do with it, it's probably,
it's a 6.5% return.
It's a 6.5% return on your money.
Right.
And, and can consider the tax impacts on that. It's probably even a little bit better. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I feel like my thoughts on this have changed. I've gotten older and more conservative, I feel like, over the last 5 years. So like when you ask me, AJ, like, does it make sense to prepay a 6.5% mortgage? I probably would have told you 5 years ago, don't pay it off. Take that money, get a 12% return, invest it, continue to leverage. That was the old me. The new me is like, yeah, there might be some peace of mind getting closer and closer to this thing being paid off. And to your point, like, we don't want to pay off the 6.5% mortgage and have a 29% credit card balance and all these other things. So if assuming all that other stuff is paid off and you're looking for a place to put that money, the only thing I would advise is, yeah, throw extra money at the 6.5% mortgage. Like, it does wonders to that amortization schedule. And you start to see like, oh my gosh, now I'm getting closer and closer to paying more principal than I am insurance or interest. Fuck, I don't know where my head's at. It's hot. It's 105 degrees in Sacramento. My brain's not working. Paying more principal than interest. What I was going to say is that the thing you should consider is once you plug money into a mortgage, it's not a super liquid asset, right? It's there, which could be good or bad. It can be good for people that can't control themselves, stick it in there and you don't have access to it. But don't do that. And then 6 months from now, be like, oh shit, I got to replace my roof. Where am I going to find that money? And go borrow that at 15%, right? So make sure that you've got emergency fund, all the other stuff going on. But I definitely feel stronger about paying down mortgage balances today than I did as my 35-year-old self. Just because, older, wiser. And
it all depends on your situation, but that's a lot of what your mortgage advisor can do for you. You don't call us only when you're ready to buy a house. Those are the kind of things that I deal with my clients, my past clients, all day, every day. Those types of questions. Let's take a look. Let's run the numbers. Let's do some different scenarios and let's think about some things that maybe you didn't think about. And let me hear your ideas too, and let's bounce it off each other. But let's figure out.
Yeah.
AJ, does it make sense in your case for you to pay down your mortgage?
Right.
Because maybe different from Matt and I.
Right. Yeah. Very, very client specific. I don't know if there's any other questions here. I feel like I'm sweating. I'm going to have to throw in the towel. Thanks so much for your time today. Yeah. Thanks for your time today, Mitch. It was a pleasure chatting with you. If you're watching this live, you're watching on replay, fire away. Even if you're watching this, a month down the road, put your comments in there, ask your questions. More than happy to help. Greatmortgagebroker.com is your connect with me and the team. We're licensed in 48 states and we'd love to help you. So thanks again, Mitch.
Thanks for having me.